Every morning at exactly 4:45 a.m., when the city was still wrapped in darkness and the streets were quiet, a 54-year-old man named Raymond stepped off the bus at the corner of Madison Avenue. He walked 3 blocks to a towering glass building that touched the sky, swiped his employee card at the back entrance, and disappeared inside before the sun even thought about rising. Raymond had been working as a janitor at Sterling Tower for 11 years. 11 years of mopping the same marble floors. 11 years of emptying the same trash cans. 11 years of cleaning the same bathrooms that wealthy executives used without ever giving a second thought to who kept them spotless. To the people who worked in that building, Raymond was invisible. Not in a supernatural way, of course. He was invisible in the way that service workers often become invisible to those who consider themselves important. People walked past him every single day without seeing him. They talked on their phones about million-dollar deals while he mopped around their expensive shoes. They laughed with their colleagues about weekend plans while he collected their coffee cups from conference room tables. Nobody knew his name. Nobody asked about his life. To them, he was just the cleaning guy. The old man with the mop. A background character in their busy, important lives. And honestly, Raymond preferred it that way. Sterling Tower was one of the most prestigious addresses in all of New York City. 42 floors of glass and steel, home to law firms, investment banks, tech startups, and at the very top, the headquarters of Blackwood Enterprises. The man who owned the entire building lived and worked on that top floor. His name was Preston Blackwood, and he was worth somewhere around $4 billion. Preston was the kind of man who made sure everyone knew exactly how rich he was. He wore suits that cost more than most people's cars. He had a private elevator that only he and his closest executives could use. He threw parties on his rooftop terrace where celebrities and politicians mingled under strings of golden lights. His face was constantly in magazines and on business news channels, always talking about his latest acquisition or his newest development project. But Preston Blackwood was also known for something else. He was known for being cruel, not physically cruel. Preston was too smart for that. His cruelty was subtler. It lived in the way he spoke to people he considered beneath him. It showed in the way he laughed at employees who made mistakes. It revealed itself in the small humiliations he handed out like business cards. Always with a smile. Always with a joke that everyone was expected to laugh at. Raymond had seen it many times over the years. He had watched Preston reduce a young secretary to tears because she brought him the wrong coffee. He had heard Preston mock a mailroom worker's accent in front of a room full of executives. He had witnessed countless moments of casual cruelty that Preston seemed to enjoy like a sport, but Raymond never said anything. He just kept his head down, pushed his mop, and did his job. He had learned a long time ago that some battles were not worth fighting. Besides, he had his own reasons for staying invisible. Reasons that nobody in that building could ever guess. On the 38th floor, there was an executive lounge that Preston had designed himself. It had leather couches that cost $50,000 each. It had a bar stocked with bottles of wine that were older than most of the employees. It had floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the entire city, making everyone who stood there feel like they owned the world. And in the corner of that lounge, there was a piano. Not just any piano. It was a concert, grand Steinway, black and gleaming, worth nearly $250,000. Preston had bought it 5 years ago for a party he was throwing. Some famous musician was supposed to play it that night, but the musician got sick and canceled at the last minute. The piano had sat in that corner ever since, untouched, unplayed, gathering invisible dust that Raymond wiped away every week. Nobody in the building could play it. Nobody even tried. It was just decoration. A very expensive piece of furniture that existed only to show visitors how much money Preston Blackwood had. But every Tuesday and Thursday night, when Raymond cleaned the 38th floor, he found himself stopping near that piano. He would stand there for a minute or two, just looking at it. His eyes would trace the curves of the wood, the perfect white and black keys, the brand name written in elegant gold letters, and something in his chest would ache. It was a strange kind of pain. Not sharp, but deep. Like an old wound that had healed on the surface, but never quite went away underneath. Raymond would stand there, feeling that ache. And then he would shake his head, pick up his mop, and get back to work. If anyone had been watching, they might have wondered why a janitor would look at a piano that way. They might have noticed the way his fingers sometimes twitched at his sides, as if they remembered something his mind was trying to forget. They might have seen the sadness that flickered across his face before he forced it away. But nobody was ever watching. Raymond was invisible, remember? There was one person in the building who treated Raymond differently. Her name was Catherine, and she was Preston Blackwood's wife. She was 20 years younger than Preston, beautiful in a quiet way, with kind eyes that actually looked at people when she spoke to them. Catherine was not like her husband. When she passed Raymond in the hallway, she always said good morning. When she saw him working late, she sometimes brought him coffee from the executive kitchen. She asked him questions about his day, about his health, about whether he had eaten dinner. At first, Raymond was suspicious of her kindness. He had been invisible for so long that genuine warmth felt like a trap. But over the years, he came to understand that Catherine was simply a good person who had somehow ended up married to a man who was not. One evening, about 3 months before everything changed, Catherine found Raymond on the 38th floor. He was polishing the wooden floor near the piano, working in slow, careful circles. She had come up to grab something from her husband's office, but she stopped when she saw Raymond near the instrument. "Do you like music?" she asked. Raymond looked up, surprised by the question. People did not usually ask him questions. "Excuse me." "Ma'am?" "The piano," Catherine said, nodding toward it. "I notice you always spend extra time near it. I was just curious if you enjoy music." Raymond was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I used to, a long time ago." "Used to?" "Some things are better left in the past, ma'am." Catherine studied his face. There was something there, something hidden behind his calm expression. She could sense it the way you can sometimes sense a storm coming before the clouds appear. "My husband bought that piano to impress people," she said softly. "But I have never once heard it played. It seems sad. Does it not? Such a beautiful instrument, and nobody gives it a voice." Raymond looked at the piano again. That ache returned, stronger this time. "Some things lose their voice for a reason," he said quietly, "and maybe that is okay." Catherine did not push further. She simply nodded, gave him a small smile, and walked away toward the elevator. But as she left, she glanced back one more time at the old janitor standing alone beside the silent piano. She could not explain it, but she had a feeling about him. A feeling that there was much more to Raymond than anyone knew. A feeling that one day, somehow, the truth would come out. She had no idea how right she was, or how soon that day would come. 3 weeks after that quiet conversation with Catherine, the entire building was buzzing with excitement. The annual Blackwood Charity Gala was coming, and it was the biggest event of the year. Every December, Preston Blackwood transformed the 38th floor into a glamorous party space. He invited the richest and most powerful people in New York. Politicians came, movie stars came, business leaders who controlled billions of dollars came. The event raised money for children's hospitals, which made Preston look generous and kind in the newspapers. But everyone who worked in that building knew the truth. Preston did not throw this party because he cared about sick children. He threw it because he loved being the center of attention. He loved watching important people come to his building, drink his champagne, and tell him how wonderful he was. The preparations started 2 weeks before the event. Decorators came in with trucks full of flowers and lights. Caterers set up a kitchen in one of the empty conference rooms. A famous event planner walked around with a clipboard, shouting instructions at everyone. And Raymond was told he would be working that night. He did not want to work the gala. He never wanted to work these events. But the building manager had made it clear that all cleaning staff were required to help. They would not be serving food or greeting guests, of course. They would be doing what they always did, staying invisible, cleaning up spills, collecting empty glasses, making sure the wealthy guests never had to see a mess for more than a few seconds. Raymond agreed without complaint. He had learned long ago that arguing only made things harder. On the night of the gala, Raymond arrived at the building 3 hours early. He put on a clean uniform, one that had been specially pressed for the occasion. He was given a small earpiece so the catering manager could call him if there was a spill somewhere, and then he was sent upstairs to blend into the background while New York's elite celebrated themselves. The 38th floor looked like something from a dream. Thousands of tiny lights hung from the ceiling like stars. White flowers were everywhere, filling the air with a sweet perfume. A jazz band played soft music in one corner, while waiters in black vests moved through the crowd with silver trays of food and champagne. Raymond had seen luxury before, but this was something else entirely. This was wealth displayed without any shame. Women wore dresses that cost more than he would earn in 5 years. Men laughed loudly and shook hands with diamond watches flashing on their wrists. Everyone was beautiful. Everyone was confident. And everyone acted like they belonged exactly where they were. Raymond moved through the party like a shadow. He picked up empty glasses from tables. He wiped up a spilled drink near the bar. He stayed close to the walls, kept his eyes down, and tried to be as invisible as possible. For the first 2 hours, everything went smoothly. Then Preston Blackwood decided to have some fun. It happened near the piano. A group of Preston's closest friends had gathered there, holding champagne glasses and talking loudly about their latest business deals. Preston was in the center, as always, wearing a suit that probably cost more than a small car. His voice carried across the room, demanding attention even when he was just having a casual conversation. Raymond was nearby, picking up some napkins that had fallen on the floor. He was trying to finish quickly and move away before anyone noticed him. But he was not fast enough. One of Preston's friends, a man named Theodore who owned a chain of luxury hotels, pointed at the piano and laughed. "Preston, why do you even have this thing? I have never once seen anyone play it. It is just sitting there collecting dust." Preston shrugged with a grin. "It is a Steinway. A real one. Cost me $240,000. It is not about playing it, Theodore. It is about owning it." The group laughed, and Theodore shook his head. "Still, it is a waste. Someone should play it. Make this party actually interesting." "Well, our entertainment is not here yet," Preston said. "The pianist I hired is running late. Traffic or something." Another man in the group spoke up. "Maybe one of the guests can play. There must be someone here who knows a few notes." Preston looked around the room with an exaggerated expression, as if he was searching very hard for someone. And then, his eyes landed on Raymond. Raymond felt his stomach drop. "What about the janitor?" Preston said loudly. Too loudly. Loud enough that people nearby stopped their conversations and turned to look. "Hey, you there?" "Cleaning man." Raymond froze. His hands tightened around the napkins he was holding. Every instinct told him to walk away, to disappear, to pretend he had not heard. But Preston was already walking toward him, and the crowd was parting to watch. "What is your name?" Preston asked, stopping just a few feet away. His smile was wide, but there was no warmth in it. It was the smile of a man who enjoyed making others uncomfortable. "Raymond, sir," he said quietly. "Raymond," Preston repeated, turning back to his friends like he was introducing a circus performer. "Everyone, this is Raymond. He has worked in my building for how long now? 10 years? 12? 11, sir. 11 years. That is dedication. And Raymond here keeps our floors so clean you could eat off them. Is that not right, Raymond?" Raymond did not answer. He just stood there, feeling the eyes of dozens of wealthy strangers staring at him like he was an animal at a zoo. Preston put an arm around Raymond's shoulder, pulling him slightly toward the piano. Raymond stiffened at the touch, but did not pull away. "So here is my question," Preston continued, his voice dripping with amusement. "Raymond, do you know how to play piano? Maybe you can entertain us while we wait for the real musician to arrive." A few people in the crowd chuckled. Someone whispered something that made another person laugh out loud. Raymond's face felt hot. His heart was pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. He looked at the piano, and that old ache came rushing back stronger than ever. His fingers twitched at his sides without his permission. He could feel the keys under his hands even though he was not touching them. He could hear the music in his head, even though the room was full of jazz and chatter. For one wild moment, he wanted to sit down at that piano and show every single person in that room what he could do. He wanted to wipe the smirk off Preston Blackwood's face forever. But then he remembered why he had stopped playing. He remembered the accident. He remembered the hospital. He remembered the silence that had followed him for 15 years. And he looked down at the floor. "I do not play, sir," Raymond said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I am just the janitor," Preston laughed, loud and cruel. "Of course you are. What was I thinking? A janitor playing a Steinway. That would be quite the sight." The crowd laughed along with him. Some people laughed because they thought it was funny. Others laughed because they were afraid not to laugh when Preston Blackwood wanted them to. Raymond felt something crack inside him, something that he had kept carefully hidden for over a decade. He pulled away from Preston's arm, nodded politely, and turned to walk away. But as he moved through the crowd, he could hear the laughter following him. He could feel the looks of pity from some and contempt from others. Near the elevator, he passed Catherine. She was standing alone, holding a glass of wine she had not touched. Her face was pale, and her eyes were filled with something that looked like shame. "Raymond, wait," she said softly. But Raymond did not stop. He could not. If he stopped, if he looked at her, if he spoke even one word, he was afraid of what might come out. So he kept walking. He took the service elevator down to the basement. He found an empty storage room, sat down on an old crate, and put his head in his hands. And there in the darkness, where nobody could see him, the invisible man finally let himself feel everything he had been hiding for 11 years. He did not cry. He was past crying. But his hands were shaking, and his chest was tight, and the memories were flooding back, whether he wanted them or not. The music, the stage, the applause, the life he had walked away from and sworn never to return to. And now a billionaire had turned him into a joke in front of 100 strangers. Raymond sat in that storage room for a long time, letting the silence wrap around him like a blanket. But somewhere deep inside him, something had changed. The crack Preston Blackwood had made was letting in light. And soon, very soon, that light would turn into something nobody expected. 2 weeks passed after the gala, and life at Sterling Tower returned to normal. The decorations came down. The caterers packed up their equipment. The wealthy guests went back to their busy lives, probably forgetting all about the janitor they had laughed at. But Raymond did not forget. Every day, he showed up for work at 4:45 inches the morning. Just like always. He mopped the same floors, emptied the same trash cans, and cleaned the same bathrooms. On the outside, nothing had changed. He still kept his head down. He still stayed invisible. He still said yes sir and no ma'am to anyone who bothered to speak to him. But inside, something was different. That night in the storage room had unlocked something Raymond had kept buried for 15 years. The memories were coming back now. Whether he wanted them or not, he would be scrubbing a toilet on the 20th floor, and suddenly he would hear music in his head. He would be vacuuming a conference room carpet, and his fingers would start moving on their own, pressing invisible keys in the air. He tried to push it away. He tried to remind himself why he had stopped. But the music did not care about his reasons. It was alive inside him again, and it wanted out. At night, in his small apartment in Brooklyn, Raymond found himself sitting at his kitchen table, with his eyes closed, his hands moving over the surface like it was a piano. He had not touched a real piano in 15 years. He had sold his own instrument after the accident, unable to look at it without remembering everything he had lost. But now, alone in his tiny kitchen, he played songs that only he could hear. Meanwhile, something else was happening at Sterling Tower. Preston Blackwood was planning another event. This one was smaller than the annual gala, but in some ways, even more important. It was a private dinner for a group of international investors who were considering putting $300 million into Preston's newest real estate project. If the dinner went well, Preston would become even richer than he already was. If it went badly, he would lose face in front of people whose opinions actually mattered to him. Preston wanted everything to be perfect. He hired the best chef in the city, He ordered flowers flown in from Holland. He rented artwork to hang on the walls because apparently his own expensive artwork was not impressive enough. And for entertainment, he booked a pianist. Not just any pianist. He booked Vincent Moreau, one of the most famous classical pianists in the world. Vincent had played at Carnegie Hall, at the Sydney Opera House, at private concerts for presidents and kings. Having him perform at a dinner party was like having a celebrity chef cook you breakfast. It was unnecessary, expensive, and designed purely to show off. The dinner was scheduled for a Friday evening. 50 guests would attend. Everything was planned down to the smallest detail, and then, 3 hours before the event, disaster struck. Raymond was in the basement, organizing cleaning supplies, when he heard shouting from upstairs. He did not pay much attention at first. There was always some kind of drama happening in the building, but then his earpiece crackled, and he heard the catering manager's panicked voice. All hands to the 38th floor. We have a situation. I repeat. All hands to the 38th floor. All hands to the 38th floor. Raymond took the service elevator up, expecting a spill or a broken glass or some other small emergency. But when the doors opened, he walked into chaos. Event coordinators were running around with phones pressed to their ears. The catering staff looked confused and worried. Preston Blackwood was standing in the middle of the room, his face red with anger, yelling at his assistant, "What do you mean he is not coming? I paid him $200,000. The assistant, a young woman who looked like she might cry at any moment, held up her phone with shaking hands. His manager just called. He collapsed at the airport. They think it is his heart. He is being taken to the hospital right now." Preston's face went from red to purple. "I do not care about his heart. I have 50 investors arriving in 3 hours. What am I supposed to do? Play music on my phone like some college student throwing a party?" Raymond stood near the wall, watching the scene unfold. He should have left. This had nothing to do with him. But something kept him rooted to the spot. Over the next 2 hours, he watched Preston and his team desperately try to find a replacement. They called every agency in the city. They reached out to music schools, to jazz clubs, to anyone who might know someone who could play classical piano at a professional level on 3 hours' notice. Nobody was available. One by one, every option fell through. The famous pianist was in the hospital. His backup was performing in Chicago. A professor from Juilliard was at a family funeral. A young prodigy they found online turned out to be only 12 years old, and his parents refused to let him perform at a private party for adults. With 90 minutes left before the guests arrived, Preston Blackwood did something Raymond had never seen him do before. He panicked. Preston paced back and forth across the marble floor, running his hands through his perfectly styled hair until it stuck up in all directions. He loosened his tie. He cursed under his breath. For the first time since Raymond had known him, the billionaire looked like a man who had lost control. Raymond watched all of this from his quiet corner, and then he felt someone approach him. It was Catherine. She looked tired. There were dark circles under her eyes, and her usual calm expression was replaced by something more anxious. But when she saw Raymond, something flickered across her face, something like hope. "Raymond," she said quietly, pulling him further away from the chaos. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course, ma'am." Catherine hesitated. She glanced back at her husband, who was now shouting into his phone at someone who probably did not deserve it. Then, she looked at Raymond with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. "That night at the gala," she said slowly, "when my husband asked if you could play piano, you said you did not play. But that was not entirely true, was it?" Raymond felt his chest tighten. "Ma'am, I do not think. I saw your hands, Raymond. When you were standing near that piano, your fingers were moving, like they were playing something only you could hear." She paused. "I have seen that before. My father was a musician, a violinist. He did the same thing when he heard music. His hands would move without him even realizing it." Raymond did not know what to say. He had spent 15 years hiding this part of himself, and now this woman he barely knew was pulling it into the light. "I know this sounds crazy," Catherine continued. "And I know my husband treated you terribly. You have every reason to say no. But I am asking you, Raymond. Not for Preston. Not for his investors. For me. She took a breath. Can you play? The question hung in the air between them. Raymond thought about the last 15 years. He thought about the silence he had wrapped around himself like armor. He thought about his wife and daughter, gone in a single terrible moment, and the music that had died with them. And then he thought about that night in the storage room. The crack inside him. The light that was starting to get in. I have not played in 15 years, he said quietly. Why not? Raymond looked away. Because the last time I played, I lost everything that mattered to me. My wife. My daughter. They were my whole world. And when they were gone, the music went with them. Catherine's eyes filled with tears, but she did not look away from him. I am so sorry, Raymond. I did not know. Nobody knows. I have never told anyone here. They stood in silence for a moment. The chaos continued around them. But it felt distant now. Like it was happening in another world. Finally, Catherine spoke again. I am not going to pressure you. If you say no, I will understand. And I will never mention this again. But if there is any part of you that wants to play again, any part of you that misses the music. She reached out and gently touched his arm. Maybe this is your chance to find it again. Raymond looked across the room at the piano. The same piano he had stared at for 11 years. The same piano that had haunted his dreams and ached in his chest. And for the first time in 15 years, he did not look away. If I do this, he said slowly, I need one thing from you. Anything. No matter what happens, no matter how your husband reacts. Promise me you will not let anyone stop me once I start. Catherine nodded without hesitation. I promise. Raymond took a deep breath. His hands were trembling. His heart was pounding. But somewhere beneath the fear, there was something else. Something that felt like coming home. Okay, he said quietly. I will play. The next 60 minutes were the longest of Raymond's life. Catherine took him to a small office on the 37th floor, where he could wait without being seen. She brought him a glass of water and a clean suit that belonged to one of the junior executives. It was not a perfect fit, but it was close enough. Raymond put it on with shaking hands, fumbling with the buttons like a teenager getting ready for his first dance. While he changed, Catherine stood outside the door and talked to him through the wood. She told him that she had spoken to the event coordinator. She told him that nobody else knew who would be playing tonight. She told him that Preston was still frantically making phone calls, refusing to believe that the situation was hopeless. He does not know it is you, Catherine said. Not yet. I thought it would be better that way. Raymond looked at himself in the small mirror on the wall. He barely recognized the man staring back at him. For 11 years, he had seen himself as a janitor, a cleaner, a nobody. But now, dressed in this suit, with the ghost of music stirring in his chest, he looked like someone else entirely. He looked like the man he used to be. Downstairs, the guests began arriving. Raymond could hear the distant murmur of voices, the clink of glasses, the polite laughter of wealthy people pretending to enjoy each other's company. He closed his eyes and tried to steady his breathing. 15 years. It had been 15 years since he had performed in front of an audience. 15 years since he had touched the keys of a piano while people watched. The last time had been in Vienna, at a concert hall filled with 2,000 people. His wife had been in the front row, wearing the blue dress he loved. His daughter had been backstage, too young to sit through a whole concert but old enough to blow him a kiss before he walked out. That was the night before the accident. Raymond pushed the memory away. He could not think about that now. If he thought about it, he would fall apart, and he needed to hold himself together for just a little longer. A soft knock on the door made him jump. Raymond? Catherine's voice was gentle. It is time. He opened the door. Catherine looked at him, and something in her expression shifted. Her eyes widened slightly, and she tilted her head like she was seeing him for the first time. You look different, she said quietly. I feel different. They walked together to the service elevator. Catherine explained the plan as they rode up to the 38th floor. The guests were finishing their main course. In about 10 minutes, Preston would stand up to make a speech and introduce the evening's entertainment. That was when Raymond would walk out. "What will Preston do when he sees me?" Raymond asked. Catherine hesitated. "I do not know. But I meant what I said. I will not let anyone stop you." The elevator doors opened, and Raymond stepped into a small hallway behind the main event space. Through a crack in the door, he could see the dining room. 50 people sat at round tables covered in white cloth and crystal glasses. Candles flickered everywhere. The piano sat in the corner, waiting, its black surface reflecting the golden light. Raymond's heart was beating so hard he could feel it in his throat. A few minutes later, he heard Preston's voice rise above the chatter. The billionaire stood at the front of the room, holding a microphone, wearing his most charming smile. He thanked the guests for coming. He talked about his new project, about the incredible opportunity they were all part of. He made jokes that were not very funny, but everyone laughed anyway because that is what you do when a billionaire makes a joke. And then Preston said the words Raymond had been waiting for. "And now, for your entertainment this evening, we have a very special performance. A world-class pianist, who I am sure will take your breath away." Preston paused, glancing toward the side door where the real pianist was supposed to enter. His smile flickered for just a moment as he realized nobody was coming. He looked at his assistant, who shrugged helplessly. That was when the door opened, and Raymond walked out. The room went quiet. Not the polite quiet of people waiting for something to happen. This was a different kind of silence. This was the confused, uncomfortable silence of people who did not understand what they were seeing. Raymond walked across the marble floor with his head held high. He did not look at the guests. He did not look at their expensive clothes or their confused faces. He looked only at the piano. Preston's face went through several emotions in the span of a few seconds. Confusion, recognition, disbelief, and then, finally, anger. "What is this?" Preston hissed, his microphone still on. The words echoed through the room. "What are you doing here? This is you, are the janitor." A murmur rippled through the crowd. People leaned toward each other, whispering. Someone laughed nervously. Raymond stopped walking. He was only a few feet from the piano now. He turned and looked directly at Preston Blackwood for the first time in 11 years. "Yes," he said calmly. "I am the janitor. But I am also something else." He sat down at the piano. Preston started moving toward him, his face twisted with fury. "Get away from there. Security. Someone get this man, Preston." Catherine's voice cut through the room like a knife. She had stepped forward from somewhere in the crowd, and there was steel in her eyes. "Sit down." Preston stopped. He stared at his wife like she had grown a second head. "Catherine." "What?" "Sit down." Something in her voice made Preston obey. He sank into his chair, still glaring at Raymond with a mixture of confusion and rage. The guests watched in stunned silence, unsure what was happening but unable to look away. Raymond turned back to the piano. He placed his hands on the keys. They were cold against his fingers, smooth and familiar and terrifying all at once. He had not felt this sensation in 15 years, and for a moment, his mind went completely blank. He could not do this. He had been foolish to think he could. The music was gone, buried with his wife and daughter, and it was never coming back. But then, in the silence, he heard something. It was not a real sound. It was a memory. The sound of his daughter laughing while he played her favorite song. The sound of his wife humming along from the kitchen. The sound of joy that music had once brought into his life before everything fell apart. And Raymond began to play. The first notes of Chopin's Ballade, No. 1-inch G minor, floated through the room. Soft at first, almost hesitant, like a voice that had not spoken in years. But with each passing measure, the music grew stronger, more confident, more alive. Raymond's fingers moved across the keys like they had never stopped. 15 years of silence melted away, and the music poured out of him like water breaking through a dam. Everything he had kept bottled up inside, the grief, the loneliness, the longing, found its way into every note. The guests sat frozen in their chairs, Some of them had tears in their eyes and did not even realize it. Others had their mouths slightly open, unable to believe what they were hearing. This was not the playing of an amateur. This was not someone who had learned a few songs to impress people at parties. This was mastery. This was the kind of playing that took decades to develop. The kind that could fill concert halls and bring audiences to their feet. The kind that had once made Raymond one of the most celebrated pianists in the world. The piece built to its climax. Raymond's hands flying across the keys with a speed and precision that seemed almost impossible. The music filled every corner of the room, wrapping around the guests like a living thing, demanding that they feel something, whether they wanted to or not. And then, with one final, thundering chord, it was over. Silence. For 3 long seconds, nobody moved. Nobody breathed, and then the room exploded. People leaped to their feet, clapping so hard their hands must have hurt. Someone shouted, "Bravo!" Others wiped tears from their cheeks without any shame. The applause was deafening, washing over Raymond like a wave. He sat at the piano with his eyes closed, his hands still resting on the keys. He was shaking, his face was wet, and he did not know when he had started crying. When he finally opened his eyes and looked up, the first person he saw was Preston Blackwood. The billionaire was still sitting in his chair. He had not clapped. He had not stood up. He just sat there, staring at Raymond with an expression that was impossible to read. But Raymond did not care about Preston anymore, because, for the first time in 15 years, he had found his voice again, and nothing could ever take that away from him. The video was uploaded to the internet that same night. One of the investors had recorded Raymond's entire performance on his phone. He posted it with a simple caption: "The janitor at our dinner party just did this." Within an hour, it had 10,000 views. By midnight, it had crossed 1 million. By the next morning, it was everywhere. News stations picked up the story. Newspapers ran headlines like, "Mystery Janitor Stuns Billionaire's Party," and "The Cleaning Man Who Played Like a Master." Talk shows called it the most incredible video of the year. People shared it on social media with crying emojis and comments like, "I cannot stop watching this," and "Who is this man?" Raymond woke up in his small Brooklyn apartment to the sound of his phone ringing. It had not rung this many times in years. He ignored the first few calls, thinking they were mistakes. But when the ringing would not stop, he finally answered. It was a reporter from a major news network. She wanted to know his story. Raymond hung up without saying a word. But the calls kept coming. Reporters, journalists, television producers, music agents, record label executives. Everyone wanted to talk to the janitor who had played Chopin like a concert pianist. Everyone wanted to know who he really was. For 3 days, Raymond did not leave his apartment. He unplugged his phone, he closed his curtains, he sat in the dark, and tried to understand what was happening to his life. Meanwhile, the internet did what the internet does. People started digging. They searched through old concert recordings. They looked through music archives and newspaper clippings from 15 years ago. And eventually, someone found the truth. Raymond's real name was Raymond Castellano. And 15 years ago, he had been one of the most celebrated classical pianists in the world. He had performed at the greatest concert halls on every continent. He had won awards that most musicians only dreamed of. Critics had called him a genius, a once-in-a-generation talent, a man whose fingers could make a piano sing in ways that seemed almost supernatural. And then, in one terrible night, everything had ended. The accident had happened on a rainy highway in Connecticut. Raymond was driving home from a concert in Boston. His wife was in the passenger seat. His daughter, just 7 years old, was asleep in the back. A truck driver fell asleep at the wheel and crossed into their lane. Raymond survived with minor injuries. His wife and daughter did not. After the funeral, Raymond disappeared. He sold everything. He owned his house, his piano, his awards. He changed his name. He moved to a tiny apartment in Brooklyn, and he took a job as a janitor at a building where nobody knew who he was and nobody ever asked. For 15 years, he had lived in silence. For 15 years, he had buried his music along with his family. For 15 years, he had been invisible, until now, when the full story came out. the world's reaction shifted from curiosity to something deeper. People were not just amazed by his talent anymore. They were moved by his pain. They understood why he had walked away from everything, and they celebrated that he had found the courage to play again. The video's view count climbed to 50 million, then 100 million. Raymond received messages from people all over the world. Strangers wrote to him saying that his story had given them hope. Musicians said his performance had reminded them why they started playing in the first place. Parents who had lost children told him that watching him play had helped them feel less alone. But while Raymond's life was being transformed, Preston Blackwood's was falling apart. The same video that made Raymond famous also captured Preston's reaction. The world saw him try to stop the performance. They heard him sneer, "You are the janitor," with contempt in his voice. They watched him sit in angry silence, while everyone else gave a standing ovation. And the internet did not forgive him. Within days, Preston Blackwood became the villain of the story. News articles called him arrogant and cruel. Business partners distanced themselves. The investors who had attended the dinner began having second thoughts about working with a man who treated his employees with such disrespect. Preston's company lost 2 major deals in the span of a week. His stock price dropped. Reporters started digging into other stories about his behavior: the secretary he had made cry, the workers he had mocked, the pattern of cruelty that Raymond had witnessed for years. For the first time in his life, Preston Blackwood was facing real consequences. 1 month after the performance, Raymond returned to Sterling Tower. But this time, he did not enter through the back door at 4:45 the morning. He walked through the front entrance at noon, wearing a suit that actually fit him, while cameras flashed and reporters shouted questions. He was there for a press conference. Catherine had organized everything. In the weeks since the dinner party, she had been working behind the scenes to create something meaningful out of what had happened. She had talked to Raymond about what he wanted. She had convinced Preston that this was his only chance at redemption. And she had brought together everyone who needed to be in the room. The conference was held in the same space where Raymond had been humiliated at the gala, and where he had found his voice again at the dinner. The piano still sat in the corner, silent and waiting. Preston Blackwood stood at the podium first. He looked different than usual, smaller somehow. The arrogance had faded from his face, replaced by something that might have been genuine shame. He read from a prepared statement. He apologized for how he had treated Raymond. He apologized for the culture he had created in his company, where people felt comfortable mocking those they considered beneath them. He acknowledged that he had been blind to his own cruelty for far too long. And then, he announced a donation: $10 million to establish the Castellano Foundation for Music Education. The foundation would provide free music lessons, instruments, and scholarships to underprivileged children across the country. It would be named after Raymond's wife and daughter, keeping their memory alive through the gift of music. Raymond had requested this himself. He did not want Preston's money for himself. He did not want revenge or fame or any of the things the world was suddenly offering him. He wanted something that would matter, something that would turn his pain into purpose. When it was Raymond's turn to speak, he stood at the podium and looked out at the crowd of reporters, photographers, and well-wishers. His hands were not shaking anymore. His voice was steady. "For 15 years, I believed that my music died with my family," he said. "I thought that playing again would be a betrayal of their memory. I thought silence was the only way to honor what I had lost." Quote, he paused, looking down at his hands. "But I was wrong. My wife loved music. My daughter loved music. They would not have wanted me to bury that part of myself. They would have wanted me to share it with the world." He looked up again. "So that is what I am going to do. Not for fame, not for money. For them. And for every child who deserves the chance to discover the joy that music can bring." The room erupted in applause. Later that afternoon, after the cameras had left and the reporters had filed their stories, Raymond found himself alone in the event space. The sun was setting outside the tall windows, painting the room in shades of orange and gold. Catherine appeared beside him. She did not say anything at first. They just stood together, watching the light fade over the city. "What will you do now?" she finally asked. Raymond thought about the question. He had received offers from concert halls around the world. Record labels wanted him to make albums. Universities wanted him to teach. His old life was reaching out to him, offering him everything he had walked away from. But Raymond was not the same man he had been 15 years ago. He did not want the spotlight. He did not need the applause. "I am going to teach," he said quietly. "At the foundation. I want to work with kids who have never touched a piano before. I want to show them that music is not just for the wealthy or the privileged. It belongs to everyone." Catherine smiled. "That sounds perfect." Raymond walked over to the piano one last time. He sat down on the bench and let his fingers rest on the keys. The room was empty now, silent except for the soft hum of the city outside. He thought about his wife. He thought about his daughter. He thought about the 15 years of silence and the single night that had changed everything. And then, with no audience and nothing to prove, Raymond began to play. Not for applause, not for recognition, just for the music, just for love, just for them.